Police rescue a canine German Shepherd tied in the forest, unaware of the shocking truth ahead. Don't forget to subscribe to the Stories of Life's Acts channel. And before we continue this story, let us know where you are from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe as we release videos every day at 12:30 p.m. On a gloomy night, as the wind howled through the tree branches, an urgent call rang through the police station's radio. Police Chief James Mitchell was sitting in his office reviewing the patrol reports when the frantic voice of Sergeant Baker came through. "Chief Mitchell, we have an emergency. Max, the canine dog from the unit, has gone missing during a drug bust in the Westwood Forest. We need immediate assistance." James immediately stopped what he was doing, stood up quickly, and grabbed his police cap. He glanced at the photo of Max on his desk. Max was a German Shepherd, a loyal partner who had been involved in dozens of drug busts, armed criminal pursuits, and dangerous rescue missions. Max was the pride of the unit, always ready to face any challenge. But now the dog was missing in a remote area, and that left James deeply concerned. James urgently ordered the K9 unit and other officers to prepare. "Everyone get ready. We need to leave immediately." He climbed into the specialized vehicle, along with 3 officers and 2 other K9 dogs, and headed toward the Westwood Forest. It was an area near the border, frequently used by drug traffickers and dangerous groups who hid in the woods. Before reaching the location, James called Sergeant Baker to confirm the situation. "Any signs? We have checked the area near the forest's edge, but there is no trace of Max. Officers have gone through some areas Max might have passed, but everything is eerily quiet." "There is no sign of any disturbance, no noise, or any signs of an attack," Baker replied. "That makes it even more suspicious," James frowned, his unease growing. "I will be there soon." By the time James's team arrived at the Westwood Forest, it was completely dark. Everything was engulfed in dense darkness, with only the sounds of the wind and rustling leaves. The light from flashlights flickered, shining through the thick canopy, creating a cold and ominous atmosphere. The officers split up, each heading in different directions to comb the area. But after a long search, no one found any traces. There was no sign of Max or anything unusual. Only an eerie silence hung in the air. James looked around, sensing something lurking behind the shadows. "There has to be something here," he whispered, then ordered the team to continue searching farther into the forest. Close to midnight, an officer named Mike reported over the radio, "Chief, I found a strange set of footprints. They lead deeper into the forest." James immediately ordered, "Follow the tracks. Do not lose them." He decided to go with Mike as they ventured deeper into the woods together. The footprints became more distinct, and they did not resemble normal human or animal prints. The tracks were rough, as if they had been sliced or made by something. Each mark seemed to be guiding them somewhere, but it was impossible to understand why these strange footprints would be found in this area. James couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but the belief that Max was still alive and trapped somewhere kept him from turning back. As they neared an open area in the forest, Mike stopped and pointed to something between the bushes. James approached, his heart pounding. It was a piece of torn red fabric, strange and tattered, resembling part of Max's outfit. Blood was scattered nearby, along with claw marks. Max couldn't have caused these injuries himself. "Max was here," James whispered. "We need to find him now." The trail became clearer, leading them deeper into the forest, where the light from their flashlights could not penetrate. James felt that something was very wrong, something out of place. Each step in the darkness made him feel as though an invisible eye was watching every move. Max was somewhere nearby, and he could not stop now. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It had become a task to solve a deeper mystery, a dark force lurking in this forest. As James and his team continued deeper into Westwood Forest, the atmosphere grew more suffocating and tense. Though the flashlights illuminated parts of the area, the thick darkness seemed to consume everything around them. The officers' footsteps echoed, but the farther they went, the quieter and stranger the surroundings became. The dense canopy of trees blocked out the sky, leaving them with nothing but the dim light of their flashlights ahead. "Captain Mitchell, something is not right here," Sergeant Baker said, his voice slightly trembling. "I feel like we are being watched." James nodded, feeling the same way. "Keep searching. Don't take your eyes off any of the tracks. Max could be nearby." The team split into smaller groups to search different areas. James led the way with Officer Mike and 2 other canine dogs, following a faint trail. The towering trees, like black columns, blocked the light from their flashlights, making the atmosphere even more ominous. "There has to be something we haven't found yet," James said, his worry growing. "Max can't just disappear without any clear trace." A small sound from ahead made the team stop, tense. They listened, but all they could hear was the wind whistling through the branches. A heavy feeling lingered, as if the forest was hiding a secret no one could uncover. Officer Mike moved forward, his eyes scanning everything around him. Suddenly, he stopped and crouched down. "Chief, I found this," Mike said, pointing to the ground. James approached and saw a thin rope, cut and scattered near a large rock. The rope appeared to have been used to bind something. The trail of blood continued into a darker area where no light reached. "This is a clear sign. Someone cut the rope and left it here," James said, his face tense. "Max couldn't have escaped from that rope on his own." "We have to keep going," Mike said, his face anxious but determined. "Max is somewhere close. I can feel it." As the team moved on, the traces became clearer. Blood soaked into the ground, forming a small trail that ran through the bushes. The air in the forest grew colder, as if it were haunted by something dark. James felt goosebumps rise on the back of his neck, an unexplainable sense of unease stirring inside him. "Stay in contact," James said over the radio, ordering the other teams to continue checking the remaining areas. A few minutes later, a frantic scream from another officer echoed in the quiet of the forest. "Chief, we need you here immediately." James rushed toward the source of the cry. A sense of dread surged within him. When he arrived, his eyes widened at the strange sight. An abandoned kennel lay in the middle of the forest. The kennel looked familiar, like the place where canine dogs were usually housed and trained. But the strange thing was, this kennel was empty, with only a piece of rope left behind. Baker approached and examined the scene, then spoke with concern in his voice. "Chief, I do not understand. Why is there a kennel here, and why isn't Max found here?" James didn't respond immediately, silently scanning the area with unease. "There is something we do not know. Max may have been taken somewhere else in this area." He gazed at the empty kennel, sensing a deep sense of foreboding. Max's disappearance wasn't just an accident. Something was happening in the darkness of this forest, a dangerous secret waiting for them to uncover. "Keep searching. Do not miss any traces," James said, his voice filled with determination. As James's flashlight swept across the bushes, he suddenly noticed something reflecting the light, like a piece of metal. He approached and realized it was a small box buried under a layer of decayed leaves. When he opened the box, James couldn't believe his eyes. Inside was an old photo of Max and several documents detailing secret experiments. James couldn't find the words. A cold breeze swept through the forest, sending a chill down his spine. His team was getting closer to something incredibly dangerous that they had no idea about. The deeper they ventured into the Westwood Forest, the more James and his team could feel the eerie silence enveloping them. Despite their focus on searching for Max, the strange atmosphere seemed to make everything heavier. Every step in the darkness felt endless, and the sound of leaves rustling underfoot made everything feel ominous and bizarre. There were no other sounds, no wildlife, just an eerie quiet, as though every creature had vanished from the forest. James stopped, sensing that something was lurking in the shadows. "Baker, follow the tracks Mike found and see if there's anything new," he ordered. The tension in his voice was impossible to hide. Baker nodded and immediately headed in the direction Mike had indicated, while James stood still, observing everything around him. He felt as though something was watching him, but when he looked back, there was nothing but the impenetrable darkness of the forest. "What do you think of these tracks, Baker?" James asked when his captain returned with a torn piece of fabric he had found near the bushes. The fabric looked like part of Max's outfit, stained and bloodied. Baker stared at the fabric. It seems like Max tried to escape from the ropes, but this does not look like an ordinary incident. It appears someone intentionally created these tracks. James gazed at the fabric and remained silent for a long moment. These tracks aren't Max's. That means someone deliberately led us in a specific direction. A feeling of unease rose within him as he realized that this search was no longer just about a missing canine. "We need to examine every trace more carefully," James said. "Keep following the tracks, but be cautious. None of us can predict what is waiting for us." The team continued moving, and an hour later, the traces became even more strange. Bloodstains were scattered across the ground, but not in the usual patterns they had seen in previous cases. The blood didn't form a straight line or a circle, but instead appeared as small, scattered splatters, as if Max had been deliberately led somewhere. These traces looked like footsteps that had been blurred, with intermittent blood spots that led to a dark area that could not be explained. Mike looked at the blood trail and said, "These stains do not look like a normal escape attempt by a dog." "Something's wrong, Chief." James nodded, the tension inside him growing. "We are being lured into a trap. Someone is leading us along these tracks. Don't be fooled." Baker looked around, his eyes scanning the forest, always feeling as though something was watching them. "Chief, should we stop? I do not like this feeling one bit." James paused for a moment, but then he replied, "No, we cannot stop now. If we stop, we will never know the truth. Let's keep going." They continued following the blood trail, no one speaking any further. The deeper they went, the more bizarre the traces became. Occasionally, they found other scattered objects on the ground, a collar cut loose, a piece of old rope, and signs of heavy objects being dragged through the earth. All of these things created a strange picture, as if someone had intentionally created a path leading them into a trap, but the purpose remained unknown. A moment later, an officer reported over the radio, "Chief, we have found something ahead. We need assistance." James immediately took the lead, along with Mike and Baker, quickly moving forward. The tension was palpable, each step they took making the air feel heavier. When they arrived, a strange sight appeared before them. In front of them was a vast area where large stones were arranged in a strange circle, like a forsaken place with no sign of life. But in the very center of the circle, something was lying there. James approached and looked down. It was a metal box, rusted, with blood scattered around it. "What is this?" Mike asked, his eyes wide, unable to believe what he was seeing. James didn't answer immediately, staring at the box, a chilling sensation rising in him. "This is not a normal situation," he whispered. "We need to open it." As James opened the box, he could not have anticipated what was inside. A secret document, drawings, and notes about an experimental program detailing the use of canine dogs in special missions. James realized that Max had become a part of it. James stepped back, stunned. Something very big is happening here, and we have known nothing about it. The truth was slowly revealing itself, and each step they took in the forest brought them closer to a dark secret they could never have imagined. As James and his team stood watching the open metal box, the air around them grew eerily still. The drawings and documents inside were not something any soldier or police officer could have imagined. These were not ordinary papers, but files about a military experiment program, a secret project that had been carried out many years ago. The symbols, charts, and instructions written on each page made James and his team feel as if they were uncovering a much bigger secret than they had ever thought. "Chief, look at this," Mike said, his voice trembling, pointing at a detailed drawing. "These are specs for drugs and special training techniques. But why are there notes about canine dogs?" James bent down, grabbed the drawing, and closely examined the notes. The records described a special training method they had never heard of before, aimed at improving the response and endurance of canine dogs in extreme situations. However, what made James and the officers in the team shudder were the small lines written in a different ink. "Experiment results. Using canine dogs as test subjects for biological drugs will enhance combat effectiveness and minimize pain during special missions. These words hit them like a painful slap. James felt dizzy. He couldn't believe what he had just read. No way. Has Max become part of this experiment? James wondered, a growing sense of unease rising in him. Baker stepped forward, his gaze filled with suspicion. Chief, is this why Max disappeared? Maybe we have stumbled into a much larger trap than just a missing dog. James couldn't deny it. He looked around the area, the strange stone circle, the bloodstains leading here. Everything pointed in one direction. What they had thought was a simple disappearance turned out to be part of a secret military experiment network. We need to find out who is behind all this, James said, his voice cold and resolute. And it is not just Max, there may be other canine dogs, or even humans involved. Chief, this is something we cannot handle on our own. Mike spoke up, his voice filled with worry. If someone is running these experiments, we could be up against a very powerful force. James nodded, unable to deny the truth. But he could not stand by and watch Max and the other dogs being exploited like this. It was time to take action. Team, we need to split up and gather more information. I believe these documents are just the tip of the iceberg. Someone must know about this program. Remember, we are not just looking for Max. We need to uncover the truth behind these experiments. The team nodded, quickly splitting up to explore the surrounding area. James led the way, his eyes scanning each stone, bush, and dark patch of land in the forest. The feeling of being watched resurfaced strongly, but this time, it was not just simple anxiety. There was a terrifying presence following them, and James could feel it with every step. As James entered a larger area, he suddenly spotted a faint light flickering ahead. He quickly signaled for his team to move closer. When they approached the source of the light, they discovered an old computer hidden in a sports bag. This wasn't a standard military device. It seemed to have been used for tracking the experiments. This is a GPS tracker, Baker realized as he opened the computer. On the screen, they saw a large map with many red-marked points, all located in a vast area that James recognized as being near the forest. Some points were even close to old military sites, places that frequently conducted military experiments. It seems these experiments were conducted at various locations. And the K9s, perhaps not just Max, were all part of these experiments, James said, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. We need to track these points. Baker turned to him, speaking softly. If we do that, we might run into dangerous organizations. They will not stop. James couldn't ignore that possibility. But his goal hadn't changed. He had to find out what had happened to Max and uncover the truth about these experiments. It was too late to back down now. We have to report to our superiors, James decided, his voice firm. But not right now. If someone has been tracking us, we will not know what they are doing. We need to act quickly and avoid drawing attention. With the new information in hand, James and his team continued their investigation. Every step brought them closer to the dark truth none of them could have imagined. The bizarre experiments, Max's involvement, and the secret organizations were slowly coming to light. And even though James's officers felt anxiety and fear, they knew that if they kept going, they might uncover the secret behind Westwood Forest, one that could change everything forever. As the light faded into the dark of night, the atmosphere in the forest grew eerily quiet. James and his team, after uncovering the computer and documents in the metal box, felt as if they had walked down a path they could never turn back from. But as they continued moving forward, an indescribable sense of invisible threat began to surround them. No one could see it. There were no sounds, but everything around them seemed off. Does anyone feel that? Baker spoke, his voice low. It feels like someone is watching us. James stopped, his eyes scanning the shadows of the trees. This indescribable feeling made him uneasy. Stay alert, everyone, he ordered. We might be being watched. Baker glanced around, then quickly moved closer to James. Chief, I do not feel right. Everything seems to be changing. This forest, it feels different. James took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Faced with this invisible threat, he realized that it was not just him who felt it. Mike and the other officers seemed uneasy too, their eyes constantly searching, jumping at the smallest movement in the dark. In the meantime, an officer standing nearby suddenly discovered another trace, but this time it was not Max's trail. Instead, it was a strange mark like fresh blood, but not from a human or a dog. These bloodstains didn't follow a straight line, but appeared in small patches, with signs as though they had been intentionally wiped away. "Chief, do you see this? These aren't normal tracks," the officer said, pointing to the bloodstains. James looked closely, then signaled for the team to move closer. "What kind of tracks are these?" he asked, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. The officer crouched down and touched the ground. "It is like something moved very quickly and did not leave much behind. It seems like something that is neither human nor animal is leaving these traces." A cold shiver ran down James's spine. He couldn't make sense of these marks. Could it be some strange creature living in this forest, or is someone creating false traces to mislead them? "We need to be careful," James ordered. "Don't be misled. If someone is trying to lead us astray, we must not blindly follow. We need to understand the real threat before continuing." The team continued moving, but the air in the forest grew heavier. With every step, it felt as though something was behind them, invisible, but its presence was unmistakable. Cold winds swept through the trees, bringing a sinister feeling, making their senses sharper than ever. Baker glanced around, then turned to James. "Chief, do you feel it?" "There is definitely some presence in the darkness." James looked into Baker's eyes, noticing the worry there. "I know, but we cannot let it distract us. Our goal is still to find Max, and we need to continue uncovering these experiments." As James's team approached a low area in the forest, they suddenly heard an odd sound. At first, it was just a faint noise, but then it grew clearer, like footsteps getting closer. James's heart pounded in his chest, and he signaled for the team to stop. "Turn off the lights! Turn off the lights!" James whispered, and all the officers followed his order, turning off their flashlights, leaving only the dim shadows surrounding them. For a moment, the forest was plunged into complete silence. James held his breath, his eyes scanning for any movement in the darkness. Then suddenly, a figure appeared in his line of sight. It wasn't human, it wasn't a wild animal, but a shadowy form moving swiftly, so fast it was almost impossible to see clearly. "Run!" James shouted, but just as he was about to move, the shadow vanished into the darkness as though it had never existed. The team froze, not daring to breathe. They didn't know what it was, but it was definitely a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. James turned to look at his team, the fear in their eyes unmistakable. "We can't keep going like this. Something in this forest is watching us, and it is not an animal or a regular enemy," James said, his voice serious. Baker nodded. "We need to report this threat immediately, Chief. Otherwise, we will fall into a trap we cannot escape." James was silent for a moment, then replied, "We cannot let them know too soon. What we are facing might be much bigger than we thought. Let us keep monitoring, but stay extremely careful." In the silence that followed, they continued moving forward, their minds full of worry. This unseen threat wasn't just the darkness or strange sounds. It was something far more terrifying, a force they couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. And with every step they took in the forest, they were getting closer to a dark truth no one could have imagined. The air in the forest grew more suffocating, as though the unseen presence James and his team sensed was enveloping everything. They moved through the ancient trees, sometimes stopping to check for traces or listen for strange sounds from the darkness. But the threat they could not see still loomed, leaving them with an inescapable feeling of being watched. As James' team approached an area that seemed devoid of life, an unexpected sight caused them to stop. Ahead was a clearing where the starlight could not penetrate, but it wasn't the stillness they had expected. On the ground, the bodies of several animals, not just canines, lay scattered, all dead in a strange manner. There were no obvious wounds, but their faces were contorted in agony, their eyes wide open, filled with fear. "We have come to the right place," James whispered, his gaze fixed on the haunting corpses. Mike approached one of the bodies, crouching to examine it. "Chief, this wasn't caused by wild animals or humans. This is something else." James looked at each corpse, feeling a rising unease. Why did they die like this? Why were they left here? Baker moved closer, his eyes full of suspicion. "Chief, I have a theory. I do not think these animals were accidental victims. I think they were used in an experiment, just like Max." James nodded, sensing that everything they had uncovered so far was just a part of a larger story. He looked around, then slowly spoke. "Yes, it seems like this is where these experiments took place. But I can't understand why they were killed like this." As the team discussed their findings, suddenly, a chilling sound echoed from deep in the darkness. It was something like the sound of soft footsteps, but it felt like something enormous was moving, strong and swift. James's heart raced in his chest, and he signaled for the team to prepare. "We are not the only ones here," James said, his voice cold and firm. "Get ready, and do not let yourselves get distracted." The team stood still, preparing to face what they could not see. Then suddenly, a dark shape appeared from the shadows, moving as fast as the wind, rushing toward them in a flash. It wasn't an ordinary animal or an intruder. It was a strange creature, its shape unidentifiable, but it moved so fast they could not react in time. James and his team drew their weapons, but just as they were about to shoot, the creature disappeared back into the darkness, leaving only the sounds echoing like a howling wind. "Where did it go?" Mike gasped, his eyes filled with confusion. "We have witnessed something that does not belong to this world," Baker said, his voice trembling. "I can't believe it. That was an unimaginable creature." James took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Not now, Baker. We need to keep moving. Max is still out here somewhere." The team continued to move forward, but the indescribable feeling, the presence of an unseen threat, became increasingly palpable. Strange figures continued to appear in their peripheral vision, just for a moment, enough to make them stop and think. They stopped in front of a large stone wall, where a narrow entrance led downward into the earth. This entrance didn't resemble anything in nature, and it was certainly not part of the forest. James had no choice but to signal for the team to enter. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere below was a stark contrast. It was dark and damp, with flickering lights from old equipment and faint electrical currents running through the cables hanging from the walls. The team moved deeper, and as they entered a larger area, they discovered a chilling sight. This was not a typical laboratory. Instead, it was a vast room filled with strange equipment and machinery that they could not recognize. On long tables, there were dissected animal bodies, body parts being experimented on, and brain scan images displayed on screens. The canine dogs were here as well, but they did not look like the normal dogs James was familiar with. "This is the truth we cannot imagine," James said, his voice choking. "These experiments, we can't stop now, and we can't let this continue." As James looked at one of the screens, another map appeared, and this time it didn't just show the Westwood Forest area. Various locations on the map indicated other areas that had been manipulated, places where these experiments were still ongoing. "We are facing a secret military organization or a research group beyond any government's control," James realized. What are they after? And what are they doing with these creatures? They were all silent for a moment, but then a sudden sound broke the stillness. A door in the distance opened, and a man in a white coat stepped out, wearing a strange, knowing smile. "Welcome to the last place you will ever be," the man said, his voice calculating and cold. "You shouldn't be here." James felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was when the true reality began to unfold. The man in the white coat stood before them, his eyes gleaming with a chilling confidence. The door behind him slammed shut, trapping James and his team in this room, as if they had been lured into a game they could not escape. "Who are you?" James asked coldly, trying not to let any confusion show in his voice. The man smiled, not hurrying to answer. "I do not care about you. You are just a small part of much larger experiments." "Experiments?" Mike exclaimed. "This is what you're doing. Using animals as test subjects, causing inexplicable deaths?" The man walked over to a large table where there were numerous documents and photos of the dead canine dogs. "The truth is, you know nothing about these experiments," he said calmly. "We are researching the ability to control and manipulate animals, and not just animals. The dog Max you have been searching for, it is the key. These animals are just the first step, and bigger things are yet to come." James frowned, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You are experimenting on animals, but what is your ultimate goal? What do you want to control them for?" The man looked straight into James' eyes, then smiled maliciously. "What do you think you are fighting for? To protect the animals? No, you are standing in the middle of a war you have no idea about. These experiments are not just about animals. It is about creating something that humans cannot control." At this moment, Baker stepped forward, his eyes lighting up. "I get it now. You are creating creatures that can surpass the limits of humanity. You are experimenting to create a type of super being, neither animal nor human." "Exactly," the man nodded. "And you are only scratching the surface of a deep secret. You can't stop now because you are standing at a crossroads. I do not want you to interfere with this process." James felt a surge of anger. "You don't have the right to do this. Your experiments are wrong, and I will not let you continue." The man chuckled lightly, his eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction. "Do you think you can stop me? You are nothing but intruders in a world you cannot even begin to understand." From above, a voice suddenly rang out, no longer from the man. A screen abruptly lit up, and a familiar image appeared. Max, the canine dog that James and his team had been searching for all this time. Max was in a metal cage, chained up, looking weak, but its eyes were not those of a brainwashed animal. It stared at the screen with a look full of desperation, and it seemed as though something was moving in its eyes, as if it were thinking, not just reacting instinctively. "Max," James whispered, his hand clenched into a fist. "We will save you, Max." The man in the white coat showed no surprise. "Save? You cannot save it. You are facing something you cannot understand. Max is no longer a normal dog. It has been enhanced, and it possesses powers you cannot control." James didn't say anything, but in his heart, his determination was firm. They couldn't let this continue. At any cost, they had to stop these experiments and save Max. The atmosphere in the underground science room grew thick with tension. James and his team stood facing the man in the white coat, their guns in hand, ready for any situation. While they now understood part of the research group's purpose, everything was still unclear. They were not just facing a research organization, but a threat beyond their imagination. "You can't stop us," the man said, his gaze cold. "Everything you see here is just the beginning. I will not let you destroy this project. We don't care about your project. We will save Max and all the animals you are exploiting for your own purposes," James said, his voice resolute. The man smiled maliciously, then quickly gestured for the doors at the far end to open. Suddenly, figures in black clothing entered, surrounding them. The officers quickly drew their guns, but before they could react, a series of gunshots rang out, forcing everyone to fall back. At that moment, Max, the canine dog that James had been searching for all this time, emerged from the shadows, charging toward them. But this time, Max was no longer the purebred dog it once was. It had changed. Its body was larger, stronger, and in its eyes was the coldness of a creature that was no longer an animal. "Max!" James shouted, but could not stop its advance. The canine dog now resembled a war machine, no longer burdened by emotions or hesitation. It charged directly at the man in the white coat, and the arms of the security officers quickly rushed in to intervene. The situation was chaotic. Max faced off against the masked men, while James and his team had to protect themselves and Max. Gunshots rang out like thunder, and flashes of light flickered against the dark night. Everything was happening too fast. Max was no longer a victim. Now it had become part of this life or death struggle. James, with no other choice, made the final decision. He rushed toward Max, and in that brief moment, he reached the rigid body of the dog. "Max, you are not a weapon. You are my friend," he whispered, hoping for a miracle. Max stopped strangely, its eyes seeming confused. It looked at James with awareness. And then, in a decisive moment, Max turned, rushing toward James' apostrophe team and defeating those trying to stop them. The final confrontation ended. James and his team had won, but not without sacrifice. What they witnessed in that laboratory had completely changed their perspective on everything they knew. Justice had been served, but the battle was not over, and their journey had only just begun. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.